and we get the numbers up. All right, I'm going to hand over to Yvette Veggie to do the introduction for today. Yvette.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I'm Yvette Haysama. I'm a trustee and volunteer for Rescue Rehab South Africa. For the past week, I've been trying to suss out what I'm going to say to you guys this morning, and all I can say is thank you so much for everything you guys do. This conference every year is hosted around the needs in animal welfare, and we are finding a move that welfares are starting to battle financially. The land that they're on is being sold out under them because the owners need money in this current economy. And there's challenges out there like you will not believe. So we are privy to it all the time. And I'm going to tell you now, things are going to get tougher. And the reason for this conference is networking. You guys need to learn to work together because that is the only way that you're going to make it. Trust me on this. We've seen it happening. Rescue Rehab is busy with quite a few ventures. There's some that I can mention and some that I can't. We're also busy with 2 municipalities to help them put up an animal welfare and a pound. The pound, I hate that word. We're going to put in standard operating procedures and assist them in assisting their community. The poorer communities are the ones who are really, really battling. And our focus also needs to move to how we can help these people. Okay, so I think unity is key. Learning to work with the NSPCA is key. Cannot stress that enough. Okay, so there's quite a few years' experience here. Hermanus Animal Welfare, raise your hands. They are 50 years old this year. And I now can't mention them all. Sandy's Eden, raise your hand. 3 years. So we go from start to end. It's phenomenal, okay? And that's about it. I think it's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed today. We've got a packed agenda, so I'm not going to keep on waffling. And thanks for coming. We really do appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks, Yvette. All right, so first up from the NSPCA, I believe it is going to be Animal Welfare and the Law. I assume that's Jaco coming up. Welcome to Jaco. Here we go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all are well and enjoying this conference. So my forte is not public speaking. My forte is animal welfare and rescuing abused animals. So I'm going to try not to bore you today, and afterwards I hope we can have a good engagement session with regards to animal welfare and the law. But yes. So before I get to my presentation, I just want to give my apologies on behalf of Marcel Meredith, our CEO. Unfortunately, she can't be here today because we are in crisis mode at the NSPCA. I don't know if any one of you heard about the export of 60,000 sheep to the Middle East. So the NSPCA is working full force, trying to find ways to intervene, and hopefully we can stop it from happening, because these animals are going to countries where they don't pre-stun. It is a 26-day journey from them being loaded on the farm in South Africa, taken to the harbor, loaded onto the ship, being transported in the most horrendous conditions. So that is our main focus at this point in time, and therefore Marcel can't be here. But I do feel privileged that I've been nominated to be here on her behalf. All right. This is the wrong one. I didn't prep for this one yet. So I'm going to speak to you about animal welfare and the law. And before I proceed with regards to the presentation, we always get the question, why are we not changing the law? The law doesn't protect animals, it doesn't give enough protection. Why are you guys not doing anything about the law? So the simple answer is, we actually have strong legislation when it comes to the protection of animals. We're not going to deny the fact that there are some loopholes or outdated pieces in the legislation, but as the legislation currently stands, it is a powerful piece of legislation. If you take into account the offences, the powers inspectors have, it is a good piece of legislation. Our challenges come in with our justice system and the courts, having to hear our cases, getting our cases in front of court. But I'm going to get to that a bit later. But that is the question we get the most, is why do we not change the law? And as we go along, you'll see why we don't want to go there. So our main focus is the Animals Protection Act. That is the piece of legislation that protects animals from abuse. And this legislation is enforced by animal welfare organizations with inspectors that are authorized by a magistrate. It's predominantly 90% enforced by the NSPCA movement. We've got over 80 branches around the country with inspectors, and we've been named the custodians of animals by the Constitutional Court. And we'll chat about that in a bit. But this is our key piece of legislation. And as I said earlier, yes, we don't deny the fact that there are some sections that are of concern. And one of them is Section 21E of the Animals Protection Act. And this section relates to a few contraventions, but the main controversial one here is, if you read the section where it says, any person who fails to render or procure veterinary or other medical treatment or attention which he is able to render or procure for such an animal. Now that is very vague and very ambiguous, because if my dog's got a broken leg, and I give the dog a Disprin, and it's all I can afford, I have rendered treatment that I'm able to render. So on a first instance, when we get to the property, we would not necessarily be able to immediately remove the animal and prosecute. We would have to educate, and that is what the NSPCA movement believes in. We believe in educating the public first, and then we would issue a warning first, depending obviously on the severity of the case. But in such an instance, we would then be obliged to write a warning out to the person saying, your treatment is not adequate, you need to get veterinary treatment. And then if they don't comply, then we would have the full right to apply for a warrant, remove the animal, and then lay criminal charges against them. So that is one of the sections. In fact, there's only two sections that are like this in the law. And the other one is the one that relates to poisoning. We don't discuss this with the public. When we get phoned, we don't tell them about this section. We obviously try and discourage people from poisoning animals. But as the law currently stands, it says any person basically can poison vermin and marauding domestic animals. And the reason for that is because people have the right to protect their property. If a marauding domestic animal comes into their house, destroys everything in their house, they have the right to protect their property. And that's their constitutional right. And we're obviously not condoning this section, but we also don't inform the public about it. And we try and find alternative solutions, alternative humane solutions to try and avoid people from poisoning animals. So now the question is going to be, but why don't we get these sections changed? Well, as I said, people have a constitutional right. And secondly, once we start fiddling with legislation, there's going to be problems. And we'll get to that just now. I'm going to give you some background. In 2016, the ACDP party attempted to amend the Animals Protection Act. They had very good input. The NSPCA, amongst other organizations, worked with the ACDP because their point of view that they wanted to approach was to add a section into the Animals Protection Act to basically make it illegal to do certain testing or research on animals, which we thought was marvelous. We obviously supported it all the way. We've provided a lot of long hours of input into it. There were other sections they wanted to amend, and election year came, and we got nowhere with the legislation. And it's now 3 years later, and there's still no further discussion with regards to the amendment of the Animals Protection Act. So that is where we are at the moment with that. Just an interesting fact. So the Animals Protection Act in South Africa, it actually originated from the Animal Welfare Act in the UK. And if you go read the Animal Welfare in the UK, which is an updated and more modern version of the Animals Protection Act, but it basically covers the same issues. Our legislation is just in old legal terms, and the legal terms used today, like for instance, destroy an animal, we don't speak like that in our community because we don't use the word destroy. It's not really the way we would speak, but that is how the legislation speaks as it is. So the risks in amending the Animals Protection Act, and we'll go through a few bullet points, but I think the biggest risk is that as the animal welfare sector, we could stand the risk of actually enforcing the legislation. Sorry? I didn't get that. But yeah, so we could actually lose enforcing the Animals Protection Act. There's not many animal welfare organizations around the world that enforce the animal protection legislation. It goes to the police. And as we know with the current state of our country, the police are not going to adequately enforce this legislation. We can't even get them to humanely euthanize a cow that's been knocked over next to the road, where there is no NSPCA or animal welfare organization. We're talking about an animal lying next to the road, busy dying and suffering, and they refuse to shoot it because of internal politics. And now imagine if we, as an organization, our counter or our sister organizations lose the right to enforce this piece of legislation, what will happen to our animals? And the government will have a feast if we lose the right to enforce the Animals Protection Act. I don't know how many of you are aware, but we recently won a high court case against the government. Last year we won another case against the government in the High Court. We currently have a case pending against the South African National Defence Force, which Morgan James spoke about yesterday, for abusing their horses. And they would all be too happy if we didn't have the right to enforce this legislation. So some of the risks are obviously our enforcement rights being taken away and then given to the police, certain powers being taken away from our inspectors and that of other organizations, like obtaining warrants to seize animals that are abused, humanely euthanizing animals that are suffering and must be euthanized immediately to prevent further suffering, like the cow that I was speaking about. Then also some of the current offenses being removed or amended to offer less protection for the animals. So those are just a few of the risks that we face should we fiddle with the legislation. Another example of legislation that didn't go our way or didn't go as we would hoped for it to have gone is the Performing Animals Protection Act. It dates back to 1935, and the NSPCA a few years ago took this piece of legislation on review to the High Court, and 2 sections were declared unconstitutional. And we had a plan of how we were going to have this piece of legislation enforced. Now, this legislation relates to performing animals, animals used in exhibition, and safeguarding. So security companies, zoos, all of those places have to have a Performing Animal Protection Act license to be able to exhibit or display those animals or use them for safeguarding. And the magistrates were historically issuing these certificates and licenses. So the zoo would go to, or the circus would go to the magistrate, they would pay their 50 Rand fee, and then the magistrate, in some cases, would simply just sign the license and certificate without taking animal welfare into consideration. And so basically what the challenge was that a magistrate can't be playing judge and jury at the same time. It's an administrative issue. And if someone is prosecuted for not having a license, this case would then appear in front of the magistrate. So how can the magistrate issue the license, but at the same time hear the case? So the High Court then ruled in the NSPCA's favor. We then teamed up with the Department of Agriculture, the South African Veterinary Council, and a committee was formed, which was then ordered by the High Court. And this committee then reviewed all the applications. And let's say, for instance, we got an application from a security company. The committee would then review it and attach certain conditions to the license to improve the welfare of the animals. So it worked well. It was done for a few months. The different bodies worked well together. It wasn't just the SPCA doing it. And then when this eventually got to the Constitutional Court, the court then decided, no, it can't work like this. It has to go to the Department of Agriculture. And now the Department of Agriculture is issuing these licenses, which comes with its own challenges. So that is just one example where we thought we would have an opportunity, have welfare brought into the equation, get these licenses, and animals helped at the same time, and also looking at amending the legislation at the same time so that animals can't be used, wild animals can't be used in circuses. And unfortunately, we didn't get that way. So that's just one example of things not going the way as planned. And that's the risk we face with the Animals Protection Act. So when do we prosecute? As I said earlier, we believe in education. So we would educate the public first, issue warnings. If they don't comply, then obviously we won't hesitate to obtain a warrant and then to remove the animals and then lay criminal charges. And we do this throughout the country, but in many instances we find that people are just uneducated. The formerly disadvantaged people, once we educate, if we go to those areas, they comply and they want to work with us, they want to learn. We do outreaches in the poor areas, and we work with the communities to improve the well-being of the animals. A challenge that we face is that we would be roasted for not removing an animal immediately by certain organizations, but not taking into account if we remove an animal, they're just going to replace it. So rather try and work with the animal owner, get the situation changed and improved for the better of the animal, and then we don't have to resort to removing the animal and going to court. But obviously, if they don't comply, then we would do that. So I want you to remember this section here now, because it's going to play a vital part in a later part of my presentation. But if a person is found guilty in terms of the Animals Protection Act, the Adjustments of Fines Act came in 1991, and that obviously amended fines. And if a person is found guilty in a magistrate's court, or as they call it, district court, they can face imprisonment not exceeding 3 years, or a fine up to 60,000. That is in a normal magistrate's court. And in a regional court, a person can get up to 15 years or a fine up to 300,000. So that is the maximum sentencing that can be opposed in South Africa for animal cruelty. Taking into account, that is quite high if you compare it to other countries. And we'll get to that a bit later. But please remember this sentencing, especially the district court sentencing, because that's generally where all the animal cruelty cases would be heard. Your more severe cases would be escalated to the regional court. So that would be a case like bestiality automatically goes to the regional court, but if there's cruelty charges, then those charges would be heard in the regional court as well. Dog fighting cases gets escalated to the regional court. We also have the power where the magistrate can give denial of ownership. So if a person is found guilty, the magistrate can then impose a sentence of denial of ownership for a certain period of time or on specific animals, which means that person then cannot own animals for a specified period of time. So, prosecution cases. In 2018, the NSPCA had 76 court cases. And the local SPCA branches had 121 prosecution cases in 2018. So that is almost close to 200 prosecutions for 2018, which is quite a lot of animal cruelty cases. And that's only the SPCA's statistics. But prosecuting cases comes with their own challenges because it's not just walking in, removing animals, laying charges. It takes time. We do our own investigating work. Our inspectors gather their own evidence. We have to compile a photo album. We need to get vets reports, x-rays done depending on the cases. So there's a lot of investigating work that goes into our criminal cases. So we prepare the entire docket that the police should be doing, and we go to the police station, we present it to them, and we open the charges. So all the police have to do is literally getting the accused's statement and any evidence the accused wishes to submit. We do all the other work for the police already, and our inspectors are trained on doing that. So it takes time to lay charges. We don't lay charges immediately. I'm going to give you an example of a case in Mpumalanga about 3 or 4 years ago. We had a husky that was beaten to death by the neighbors. And the SPCA was crucified for not opening a case immediately. We tried to justify ourselves why we were not going to lay the charge immediately, and other organizations interfered, and I'll use the word interfered because you'll understand shortly why. And another organization went and laid criminal charges, which means we are no longer the complainant in the matter, the SPCA. We are now probably 4 years after this has happened. This husky was cruelly beaten to death, and the person is not being prosecuted. Because the other organization interfered, they laid charges, they didn't have the evidence, and their witness that gave a statement actually retracted their statement. Whereas if the SPCA handled the case from the start, as we were doing anyway, and charges would have been laid against the owner, against the person that beat the husky, as well as the owner, because he was just as responsible, justice would have been served for that animal. And today, there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have any evidence now, because the person that was the complainant in the matter now will not give us any evidence or statements because of the interference of the other organization. There's a lot of technicalities when it comes to court cases. Like, we didn't have the original affidavit. If we had the original affidavit, we could have still pursued the charges, but we didn't have. So that animal suffered a horrifying death, and there's nothing we could do, and people got away with it. So there is a reason why we don't just lay charges immediately. In 2018, we spent 127 days in court. That is a lot. That means it's 127 days where some inspectors can't be rescuing animals. So when we lay charges, there's a lot of time and resources that go into these cases. Yes, the cost of the actual case is covered by the state, but our salaries, our evidence gathering expenses, none of that is covered by the courts. That is for our own expense. So there is a lot of money that goes into these cases. So it is very expensive, but that obviously won't deter us from laying charges, because that is why we are here as an organization. So before I move on to the next slide, which is a bit graphic, there are other challenges when we lay charges. Unfortunately, animal abuse cases is not priority for the government, for the National Prosecuting Authority, or for the courts. They deal with rape cases, murder cases. They've got so many theft cases on their hands. Our cases just don't seem to be important enough for them. So we would lay charges, and our cases would be declined to prosecute. The DPP, the Department of Public Prosecution, will decline to prosecute our cases. And then when we ask for a reason, not enough evidence. So what do you mean we don't have enough evidence? So our inspectors have to go to court, find out what is the issue, because we've done everything. We've got video footage, we've got photos, vets reports, eyewitnesses. What more do you want from us? Everything is there. And then they didn't even read the affidavit. Because it's an animal, they just decline to prosecute. So we end up with huge fights getting our cases prosecuted. So now we're talking about investigating, compiling the docket, laying the charges, and on top of that, we have to fight to get our cases to court. Now they decline to prosecute. Now we have to go to their superior because there's a chain to follow. And eventually we get to someone that says, yes, there is a case, we're going to prosecute. And sometimes we get to them where they say, we're not prosecuting. And one of those cases is Thandi Modise. I don't know if you know who she is. At the time, she was the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. Currently, she is the Speaker of Parliament. And Thandi Modise is currently probably the third top person in government. And we found horrible cruelty at her farm. Animals were dying. Pigs were eating each other to stay alive. We had to humanely euthanize a large number of pigs because it was so bad. And the case was declined to prosecute. We had all the evidence, and this woman was going to walk away scot-free without being prosecuted because she's an influential person. Now, the SPCA movement has the stance, and the NSPCA has got the stance. No one is above the law. Whether you are the president, former President Jacob Zuma, we got a warrant to visit in Tlantla. We were denied access, well, we got in, and no one's going to keep us out. And the same with Thandi Modise. Her day in court will come, and we will ensure that she is prosecuted and she faces the full extent of the law for the cruelty and the injustice she caused these animals. But this was not an easy road. We followed the procedure right through from the Department of Public Prosecutions, we went through to the National Prosecuting Authority. They declined to prosecute. Fortunately, the NSPCA went to the Constitutional Court a few years ago, and we challenged certain provisions in the Criminals Procedures Act. Because the Criminals Procedures Act says only a private person or a private body can institute a private prosecution, which means the SPCAs are not a private person. They're not a private organization. We are a public organization. And we felt this was unconstitutional because someone has to be the voice for the animals. If all the state entities decline, who's going to speak for these animals? So we went to the High Court, incurred huge amounts of costs, and we lost the case. And we were determined, and we said, this is not where we're going to stop. We then appealed the case. We went to the Supreme Court of Appeals, and we lost again, costing us a fortune. And we said, no, this is a constitutional matter. We have to fight this for the sake of the animals. And we ended up in the Constitutional Court. And guess what? We won in the Constitutional Court. And this means for the animals in South Africa, there's a voice. If government does not want to prosecute these cases, they want to speak, don't want to speak on behalf of the animals, we can. The NSPCA is the only animal organization, as it stands in the country, that can institute a private prosecution. And Thandi Modise was our first private prosecution. She's already appeared in court, and the case and trial is going ahead. We've got AfriForum assisting us with that case, and again, unfortunately, huge costs involved with that. But this is a fight that we're not going to leave. She will be prosecuted. So, and any other cases that we feel is of importance will be prosecuted. There's another dairy farm, Malati Dairy, where they keep the calves in crates, and on top of that, they chain them inside the crates. The state also declined to prosecute, and that is our second private prosecution. So we are taking our cases very seriously. Our inspectors have to follow up every week on their cases, having to find out, where are you with our case? What are you doing? Why is it not to court yet? So we take pride at the NSPCA with our cases being followed up. Another case, Dr. Alfreda Alberts, a veterinarian in Nigel. I don't know if she's known to anyone here, but this woman mutilated a monkey, chopping off 3 of its limbs. And then she testifies in court, stating that, no, this monkey will be fine with 1 limb. She was quite happy with her actions. And doesn't matter who you are. If you're a veterinarian and you do an act like this is cruelty, this is torture. We will come after you. And we've laid charges against Dr. Alberts. Her name can be in public forum. She's appeared in court already. We've concluded trial. But this case came with its own challenges. As you can see, this case dates back to 2012. And this was a long road and a huge fight to get this case to court. Because it was a veterinarian, the courts did not want to prosecute the case. And thanks to our persistence, this case eventually went to court. And Dr. Alberts now will soon face the music for her actions. And trial has been concluded, so we're just doing heads of arguments, and then we'll soon know whether she's guilty or not of animal cruelty. So the question just is, if she's found guilty, is she struck off the roll from the Veterinary Council? Yes, we actually feel she should have been suspended when we opened the charges, but unfortunately that is not the case, but she will be struck off the roll if she's found guilty. So this is just another example of a case 7 years down the line, and we have not given up. We will never give up when it comes to the animals. So according to a survey and research done by the World Animal Protection, formerly known as World Society for the Protection of Animals, they have rated countries there. I'll read them to you. The first is Austria, second New Zealand, third Switzerland, fourth the United Kingdom, fifth Chile, sixth Denmark. Those are, according to them, the best countries for animal welfare. South Africa ranked 29th, and the United States 31st. So the NSPCA does not necessarily agree with their rating here, and I'll tell you why. It's easy to rate a country on what's written on paper, but the question is, are they actually doing the work? Because it's pointless having legislation, but it's not being enforced. So keep that in mind. We'll go on to number 2, New Zealand. Pig gestation crates were only banned in 2015, but even though it's been outlawed, it's still being used. Chicken battery systems, it's banned, but they're still in the process of phasing it out. So it's still being used. The record sentence for animal cruelty, 2 years and 5 months imprisonment. Do you remember our maximum is 3 years? So we unfortunately can't be blamed for our courts not giving the maximum sentence, but it's not just with the animal cruelty cases. People that steal, people that rape, people that kill don't get the maximum sentence either. And people that steal, do other crimes also get a suspended sentence. So it's not just our cases. But there you can see a country that's ranked number 2, there's cruelty happening in their country, and it's still allowed to take place, even though the law prohibits it. In the UK, maximum sentence of 51 weeks. Come on. For a first world country that is ranked number 4, 51 weeks jail time. That is ridiculous. And then chicken battery cages are still being utilized, even though that it's been banned. And then they've had 164 convictions of animal cruelty in 2018. So if their legislation is so strong, why are we still having 164 cases being prosecuted for cruelty to animals? Then we've got Denmark. Bestiality was only outlawed in 2015. That's shocking. People paid to have sex with animals, and it was perfectly legal and acceptable. Only in 2015 was it outlawed. Pig gestation crates are still legal. 503 cruelty cases opened in 2014. And the maximum sentence for first-time offenders is 1 year imprisonment. And then just before I move on, another interesting fact, Canada is also amongst the top 10. And a case of bestiality and animal cruelty, amongst other sexual crimes, were opened against a person. And in 2016, their Supreme Court ruled that their bestiality law is actually ineffective. Because the only act of bestiality that was actually illegal in their country, and no one actually read the legislation, was if someone penetrated the animal, and not the other way around. So that meant a male animal could have sex with a female, and it would not be illegal. So that was figured out in 2016 in the Supreme Court of Appeal when the person was found guilty in a magistrate's court and appealed the case, and it was overturned. So every country, whether they're first world country, have challenges in animal welfare. So that is scary. We actually have one of the strongest bestiality legislations prohibiting it. We can go through the Animals Protection Act, we'll sit here for 2 weeks, but it's a strong piece of legislation covering so many offenses. You can name me one offense. If there's cruelty and animals are suffering, they can be charged. It's just our courts that are failing us. An interesting fact, pig gestation crates, only banned in 9 of 50 of the states in the United States of America. Battery cage systems, only banned in 7 of the 50 states in the USA. Just a fact on pig gestation crates, by 2020, if the industry in South Africa is still using it, they will be prosecuted after that. An agreement has been reached. This is actually unlawful in terms of the Animals Protection Act. But because it's been happening for so many years and accepted in the industry, it's been very difficult for us to prosecute cases like these. And through lobbying, working with the industries, they have been given until 2020. And then if they still use the gestation crates, there will be prosecution cases and they will be charged. And there would be no excuse then. So before I show you that, I just want to turn the lights off so that you can see the video nicely. But just to give you a good understanding of the work that's being done by the NSPCA. just let the credits run before they remove our video as well. So that is the work done by the NSPCA, and not everything is covered there. There's so much more work that is covered by the organization that we would keep you busy for days trying to show you the good work that we do as an animal welfare organization. And I think the important thing is that all animals matter. We care about every single animal. Morgaine mentioned the crabs yesterday that were just left at the airport. Couldn't care less about them. We couldn't care about their lives. And we were the only ones that cared for those animals, went out there, and we ended their suffering because no one else would. And those pigs, where you saw them in those horrible gestation crates, and there they are in a bigger cage where they are free to be socializing with other pigs. That is what we want to achieve, because we know we are not going to be able to end the slaughtering of animals. Yes, we all don't want that. We don't want animals to be killed, to be eaten. But we're not going to be able to stop it. It's not illegal anywhere in the world. And we're definitely not going to be able to make it illegal in this country. But what we can do is we can work with the laws that we have. We can work on improving the national standards that we do throughout SABS, the South African Bureau of Standards, getting in stricter controls to ensure the welfare of these animals, that they are treated humanely, that they are not tortured when they are being slaughtered. And those pigs is a prime example. The deadline, was actually in 2016 for them to stop, and we've already started enforcing that, prosecuting farmers, and that is why you've seen that change, where a lot of farms across the country is changing the system, and it's so easy to change. All they have to do is they have to get a grinder and go cut some of the panels in between of those crates, and then a few pigs can be housed together. It's as simple as that. They don't even have to go and rebuild a new farm for it. Just taking a grinder and making the difference and giving enrichment for these animals. And that is what we strive for, to bring about change and improving the welfare of all animals. Thank you.
Are there any quick questions? We have time for one. There is any, I'll just repeat the question.
I want to know why traditional medicine and anything with the word custom and tradition is above the Animal Protection Act and the law.
Okay, so the question is, anything traditional, custom medicine-wise, why is it above the law?
You're going to have to be more specific with an example, please.
Okay, an example I reported recently, a chemist in a township seen and disavowing cats, dogs, rabbits, hanging them out to dry for all to see. It was investigated, but because it's traditional medicine, it's allowed.
Okay, so it's involved as basically mistreating animals.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you got the information, but if an animal suffered in the process, it certainly won't be allowed. What I should explain in terms of that is if the animal was killed immediately, instantaneously, humanely, and there was no suffering beforehand, whatever they do afterwards, unfortunately, we can't intervene with that. But if that animal endured any suffering, the SPCA will act. We will remove, we will charge, and we will take the matter to court. But we have to prove suffering. So if we are able to be given evidence, proof of the suffering, video footage, or any type of evidence, we would then take immediate action and ensure that justice is served if that animal suffered. Certainly not true. And I would like to chat to you afterwards, and you can give me the information, and I'll ensure that it's sorted out.
Is there a statute of limitations on the charge of 17 and it wasn't followed through? And taking on board the advice you gave, to go through the SPCA and get the necessary affidavits, would one still be able to enforce that?
So the question is if there's a limitation on when cruelty cases can be opened, and the simple answer is no, there is no limitation. But you can't wait 2-3 years and then want to lay the charge, because you will be asked, why have you waited so long? So the sooner the better. The problem though is if the person has been acquitted in court, you cannot lay the charges again. Sure. So the question is what is the highest sentence in South Africa? Yes, actually received. Unfortunately, I don't have that stat with me, but I know for dog fighting there was direct imprisonment. And if I'm not mistaken, it was between 12 months to 2 years. But I'm not giving you factual information because I didn't bring that information with me. But there is direct imprisonment for animal cruelty. Well, yes, but we can get a maximum sentence of 3 years. Yes. Yes.
Okay, I think that's all the time, unfortunately, we have for questions. Otherwise, we're not going to keep to the time schedule.
I'd just like to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jaco. Sorry, guys. I know there's a lot of questions for the SPCA, but if we have to carry on with that, we'll be the whole day talking to the SPCA. We're going to have a short refresh.